Summer is almost over, but we still have plenty of hot, steamy jams. Summer is almost over, and I've got this cable tangled in my hands. I'm not even sure how I did that, but I did. Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown, more specifically a brand new Albums I Missed video. Today we will be talking about a slew of albums that came out in the month of August 2023 that, unfortunately, for one reason or another, I just didn't really have the time or opportunity to talk about. And it's a decent bunch with a couple of heavy hitters that I think a couple of people expected me to review, to comment on in some capacity. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. Albums I missed, August 2023. First up, we have Touchdown, the 18th full-length studio album from German classic heavy metal crew U.D.O, often referred to as simply U.D.O. It is the brainchild of U.D.O. Dirkschneider, who some of you may remember from way back in the 80s as the original lead singer for Accept. I gotta be honest, I have not really paid much attention to U.D.O. in quite some time. The last time I listened to anything with U.D.O. Dirkschneider would have been 2020's We Are One, which was a collaborative album with Das Musikkorps der Brandweiser. I think that's their name. I remember just like really thoroughly not liking that album. It was very goofy, very over the top, very cringe. Other albums in the regular U.D.O. discography I have found to be, frankly, very forgettable, very unremarkable, very meat and potatoes, like classic heavy metal. And, you know, to some extent, Touchdown is more of the same. It's definitely not something that's going to end up in my top 10. It's not an album we're going to talk about like 10, 20 years down the line. But, you know, credit where it's due. It's pretty well made. It's got a great guitar tone. It's got a nice, energetic, lively, metallic sound and feel. And U.D.O. himself, Mr. Dirkschneider, actually sounds pretty great vocally on this. This thing surprisingly has a lot of punch and youth and attitude, and it's very clean. It's definitely one of the better kind of like full-on classic traditional hard rock heavy metal records I think I've heard this year. Personally, if I'm looking for a blast of classic heavy metal, I'm more inclined to go to more recent albums from Smolder and Spirit Adrift because they're more intelligent, because they're more varied. But, you know, if you're just looking for a dose of geezer riffs and old school rock and metal jams, then you know what? Good for you. This'll do the trick. More power to you. I can't hate. It's not my cup of tea, but it really wasn't that bad, all things considered. Next up, we have Beyond the Dead, a surprise EP from gore metal maniacs Exhumed. They literally dropped this out of the blue like yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Unsurprisingly, it fucks. It goes hard. It rips. It tears. It shreds. It pounds. It pummels. It's essentially just more of what Exhumed's most recent studio album, To the Dead, did so well. These riffs, these beats, these vocals are disgusting, bloodthirsty, unstoppable. There's so much energy and it just kicks so much fucking ass. Every time I hear anything from this EP, I am immediately filled with like violent urges. Like I just want to like punch something. I prefer the studio cuts here over the live cuts at the end, but it's all fantastic. And you know, at 26 minutes long, it makes for a surprisingly more substantial EP than one would normally expect. Definitely check this bad boy out. It rips. It tears. It's awesome. Next up, we have Seeing Through Fire from Ringworm, the latest full-length studio album, and the first with Nuclear Blast Records from these hardcore, metalcore, crossover, thrash veterans and icons. This thing is way more hellish than I expected. Like, it's louder, it's meaner, it's dirtier. Like, not to say that Ringworm have ever not sounded fired up, especially, like, over the past few records, but this is probably the most fired up I think I've heard them be in a while. The songwriting is still very much in line with what I expect from Ringworm. There are no twists and turns to be found whatsoever, but that doesn't really bother me, you know? This is Ringworm doing what they do best, louder and meaner and faster and harder. And at the end of the day, is that not what you really want from a band like Ringworm? You know what I mean? Like fuck it. Like, if it works for Cannibal Corpse, why not Ringworm? And on that note, I'd go as far as to say these guys, they really are like hardcore and metalcore's answer to Cannibal Corpse. Like, they're just so consistent, so brutal. They never stop, they never compromise, and I hope that that never changes. Bless you, Ringworm, you gnarly, disgusting freaks. Next up, we have another surprise release, this time a split collaborative LP of sorts from Full of Hell and Gasp, which, as far as I can tell, is literally just called Full of Hell and Gasp. I'm not really too familiar with Gasp, and after the experimental madness of the Full of Hell Primitive Man collab from earlier this year, I wasn't really sure where Full of Hell were going to go on this split, so in a way I did kind of go into this blind. And I'm kind of happy I did, because damn, this thing is weird. Damn, this thing is dark and unpredictable and goes to all kinds of weird and crazy places. As far as the Full of Hell material is concerned, you definitely get the aggression and the violence of records like Reeks of Burning Apparition and Trumpeting Ecstasy, but there's also like more unhinged moments to this record, to their contributions, and there's also like more spacious and experimental stuff that definitely feels like something that maybe Full of Hell could have tinkered with Primitive Man on the aforementioned collab. A lot of droning, spacious sections and horrific samples and like grinding metallic clashes. This is definitely Full of Hell, just kind of being weird, artsy-fartsy, spooky, scary. And I'm kind of digging it. I don't know, man. I definitely prefer, like, the straight-up, like, grindcore power violence stuff from Full of Hell, but this is still really interesting stuff, and it makes me excited to hear this possibly meshed with the more atypical Full of Hell material on a future full-length studio album. The Gasp stuff is similar in a lot of ways. Like, it's weird and demented and fucked up and unhinged and unpredictable, but there are also, like, a lot of psychedelic textures and movements that make it extra funky. Like, listening to this material from Gasp on this split is probably the closest I'll ever get to having, like, a weird acid trip without ever actually taking acid. Really cool stuff, and it has me genuinely excited to pay more attention to Gasp in the future. Maybe check out other things they have done in the past. So yeah, definitely a fucking weird one, but definitely one that I do feel you should check out if you've got a little bit more time to kill than usual. Next up, we have U.D.O from Skalmold. I'm pretty sure I just butchered both of those words, but I don't really care, because I'm not really a huge fan of this. Don't get me wrong, if you love Viking metal, pagan metal, folk black metal, whatever the fuck you want to call this, I'm pretty sure you're going to love this. It's everything you want from the genre. It's very cinematic. It's very epic. All the woodwinds and keyboards and choral vocals and, you know, second wave black metal, tremolo riffage and blast beats you could possibly want from this genre. It's clean. It's straight to the point. It doesn't waste time. For me, though, this thing was just so by the books and so, like, paint by numbers and so atypical of everything else from this genre that it just didn't really wow me. At least with those Exhumed and Ringworm records, as safe as they played things, I just felt there was more urgency to all the material, and I just thought the riffs were so fucking sharp and fucked up. Whereas this, I don't know, it just kind of like, it just kind of went along. It kind of just feels like we're going through the motions here. Yeah, I'm just not really a huge fan. It's that simple. But hey, if you're in the mood for some fucking Viking, pagan, black folk metal, go nuts. I'm sure you'll get a kick out of this. Next up, we have Necrophony, the latest full-length studio album from American thrash metal, melodic death metal, neoclassical shred metal crew Exmortus, and yes, it is every bit as fucking cool as it sounds. A lot of regal, nuanced, hyper-technical, surgically precise music all around, the guitar playing, the percussion, the vocal work, the classical influences, and the way that they've been woven into everything to make it more epic and theatrical. It really is kind of fantastic. Like, some awesome guitar pyrotechnics and dynamics pretty much everywhere to be found across this thing. Tons of shimmering twin guitar leads and harmonies, over-the-top guitar solos, flamboyant classical flair. Thankfully, it never reaches a point of being like too much, of being overwhelming or appearing corny or silly. Exmortus take things just seriously enough. The songs like have actually really great flow and structure to them. Like, if you just want to turn your brain off and ignore all the fancy schmancy stuff, you've still got, like, a really tight, lean, mean, thrash death metal record. Like, the cake itself is amazing, and as crazy as all the icing and garnish looks, it's just as amazing. I briefly thought about giving this a review, but I kind of wanted to talk about the Death Clock movie just a little bit more. Sorry, Exmortus. But if it makes you feel better, had I given this a review, very strong 4 to 5. I think it's a great record, and you should definitely check it out if you have not already. Next up, we have Descent from Orbit Culture, perhaps one of the most hyped up releases of the month. I got quite a few people that were asking me about this, and I gotta be honest with y'all, I thought this album was kind of lame, and I think Orbit Culture in general is really, really overrated. I just found this record to be extremely predictable and extremely boring. Like, once you scrape away all the electronics and all the dynamics and all that kind of shit, you're left with a very, very simplistic and predictable groove metal record. It's a lot of the same riffs and progressions and beatdowns we've heard hundreds, if not thousands of times by now. And I'm also not really a huge fan of the clean vocals, which are a little bit too reminiscent of like mid to late 90s James Hetfield for my liking. It just doesn't really mesh with what these guys are trying to do here. So yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't get it. I don't know why other people get it. Whatever. If you dig it, good for you. But I'm respectfully going to move on. So, yeah. Cool. Next up, we have Distortions from Godthrim. I think this is my first time listening to this band, and I gotta say, I really like what I'm hearing. This is very, like, big, spacious, epic doom metal with a lot of emphasis placed on these almost cosmic atmospheres and vocal harmonies and textures. Love the really organic bass work here. I love the contrast between the quieter, more atmospheric moments and those larger, like, vocal-heavy soundscapes with the graining guitars and the droning sounds. There's a lot of emotion and, like, existentialism and loneliness here that I think is very well communicated. I do think that the record is a little bit long, clocking in at nearly an hour. It doesn't help either that you've got 2 songs that are like 12, 13 minutes long. That's completely unnecessary in my opinion. But the good stuff is really good here. I think it's very interesting, and I think anyone looking for something slightly different from like epic doom metal would have some fun with this. Next up, we have Outside the Spiral, the debut album from Tell the Dirt, a new project featuring Kelly Schaefer from Atheist, and it's an album. I'll give it that. It's of all the albums you will listen to in August 2023, this is definitely one of them. Dude, this thing is just kind of weird and maybe too much so for its own good. Like, it's equal parts Lamb of God, Alice in Chains, Korn, Strapping Young Lad. None of it really meshes together that well. It's a very clumsily arranged record, and it's also just very poorly produced and mixed and mastered and edited. It's honestly kind of an ugly record, sonically speaking. Like, it just sounds so messy. Even Kelly Schaefer doesn't really sound that great on here. His cleans are just wailing and obnoxious, and I don't care much for his tone. And even some of his gutturals, like his screeched and screamed vocals, it's just, ugh, you know? It's like nails on a chalkboard. I remember when I got the promo for this, and Till the Dirt talked about how they wanted to do something new and challenging and different and innovative with death metal by bringing all of these sounds and styles together. And I appreciate the drive, I appreciate the hustle, but damn, this just does not work. That's how you know this truly is the darkest timeline, because we got this instead of like a new Atheist record. Yeah, not a fan. If we're being honest, probably one of the worst things I listened to this month. Next up, we have Insatiable Thirst for Torment from Celestial Sanctuary, and holy shit, this thing is gnarly. This thing has huge, big, chugging, thudding rhythms, some more explosive blasts of classic death metal brutality. It also has, like, you know, gravity blasts and some great, like, massive, high-scale, action-packed choruses and peaks. The production on here is fantastic. Everything is crystal clear, but there's just a little bit of reverb to make everything just feel even bigger and even more important. And the attitude, the urgency, it's all on point. This record doesn't stop, it doesn't fuck around. 40 minutes long, and honestly, it's packed with more than enough music to be double the length without being overwhelming or tiring. I think I read on, like, the Bandcamp page for this that these guys are part of the new wave of British death metal. I don't really know what the fuck that means, but you know, it's hard to really argue when the results are this fucking cool. Next up, we have Festering Grotesqueries, and this thing just sounds like pus and sewage and vomit and shit. And I mean that in, like, the best, most flattering way possible. Like, this is just ugly, scabby, bloody, like, gore grind and death grind in the vein of, like, very early Carcass and the aforementioned Exhumed. It's raw, it's primitive, it's nasty, there are wailing vocals and moldy guitar textures and tones. Like, this is serial killer music. This is mass murder music for sure. Love the intensity and absurdity of this whole thing. I do think songwriting-wise, it's a little bit one note, a little bit one-dimensional, but it remains, like, entertaining and fierce and gross enough to keep your attention from start to finish. I don't really have much more to say. It's just a really fun, gross, weird, nasty, brutal death metal record. Definitely check this bad boy out as well. And I hope you're in the mood for some even more depraved, bloodthirsty death metal, because that's exactly what you're going to get again. We had Exhumed, we had Celestial Sanctuary, we had Dripping Decay, and now we have Werewolves with their new album, My Enemies All Look and Sound the Same. This has to be some of the most extreme, cutthroat, blackened death metal I've heard this year. The riffs, the percussion, the vocals, it's just so fucking brutal. Lots of great dynamics here, some more varied grooves and riffs pop up here and there to provide a little bit of breathing room and contrast. It is full throttle as well, so aggressive. Of everything we're talking about, this probably has the most attitude and menace and anger. I mean, you've got, like, the title track, My Enemies Look and Sound Like Me. You've got the closing number, Do Not Look Back. You've got I Hate, Therefore I Am, which is just, that's brilliant. I mean, it's so fucking edgy, but I kind of fucking love it. Yeah, I dig it, man. Another, like, absolutely brutal fucking death metal roller coaster. And finally, this brings us to Heaven into Dust from Knife, a cool little hodgepodge of, like, classic speed metal, heavy metal, first wave black metal influences, lots of screeching vocals, lots of weird, fast-paced riffing, some spooky atmospheric organ work in the very beginning, a lot of hellish vibes, a lot of energy and sweat and piss and vinegar. To an extent, I'm reminded of Midnight, but whereas Midnight is more sleazy, Knife is more violent. By no means groundbreaking revolutionary stuff, but I like it. Anyone looking for a blast of 80s, you know, smorgasbordian retro metal, I think will have some fun with this. And voila! Those are all the albums that I feel I missed in the month of August 2023. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of these albums and what other albums I should check out from this month in the near future. I probably won't review them, but maybe I'll just check them out for shits and giggles, you know what I mean? Just for funsies. Press this button right here to subscribe so you can get updates on the Metal Meltdown immediately, just in case you somehow aren't getting them already. Look, there's even more videos here! And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.